Welcome back to Usapang Bayan at kasama pa rin po natin ang ating guest, si Atty. Lorna Kapunan at ang aking co-host na si Rach. Rach, would you like to continue your question?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, you earlier mentioned po kanina sa first gap about Janet Lim Napoles. You also mentioned na not a lot of people know na give up niyo po yung case. How do you think that would affect your candidacy as senator, given na hindi po alam ng karamihan na give up niyo yung case ni Napoles, and you're somehow still linked to her?
No, I am not linked to her.
I mean, with that case.
First, people think that we handled a plunder case against her. No, we handled the case of kidnapping, which was filed against her. Because a whistleblower alleged that he was kidnapped and detained for 6 months without him being able to see his parents, etc. And the truth of the matter is that is not true. This whistleblower, Ben Horloy, went on voluntary retreat. The simple reason being that he was caught by Janet Lim Napoles as forming his own foundations and plundering himself or using PDAF. As a matter of fact, if you look at all the documents, in none of those documents show any signature of Janet Lim. It is always the signature of this whistleblower, and as it turned out, he was doing business for himself. So nabisto siya, and sabi niya, not only that, nahulian siya ng sex video with allegedly with other men, and that is why he went into these activities of making money to support his vice. And he said nakakaya sa parents niya, and the parents are cousins, are relatives of Janet Lim Napoles. He said nakakaya sa parents niya. He will go on self-exile, on a retreat. In fact, he stayed in the house with the monsignors and with the priests who were coming back and forth. How can that be a kidnapping? And that was the case we handled. And we said, let us just present witnesses to show that he is telling a lie as regards the kidnapping case. And this is where we had a difference in opinion with her other lawyers who said, huwag na lang tayo mag-present ng evidence. We just need one. I said, no, we have to present evidence. There was a daily diary that even showed the gospel of the day and his reflections for the day. So if you're a kidnapped victim, it is contrary to reason that you will write my reflections for the day. You will write there your torture for the day. Anong ginawa sa inyo na hindi ka pinapawala, nahihirapan ka, you cannot. No, there was no such thing. Besides, that house was very near the door. Parang security guard doon. He was free to go in and out. So that was a kidnapping case that we handled. We never handled. And that's even there, we had to give that up because her other lawyer advisors were saying, wag tayong magpresenta ng evidence. And as history now shows, they lost the case because they did not present evidence.
I have a question for you with respect to how the legal issues are being handled by this government. Would you say that there is some bias against people who are not within the administration in terms of how their treatment is with respect to certain cases and being coddled for those that are on the administration side?
My answer there is yes, because I have some faint idea about the Napoles list. And the Napoles list, if I recall right, unless it now has been tampered with, there were congressmen and legislators, senators, certain senators from the opposition and the administration in that list. And one would ask, bakit tatlo lang ang nasa suspension?
Are we talking about the senators?
We're talking about the 3 senators.
Yes.
Why is it that the case seems to have focused on them and at lightning speed with undue haste, as we lawyers say, compared to the other administration officials who are similarly in the list?
If you were to become senator, what would you do to avoid situations like that in the future?
Well, I think we should, first of all, we should be clear about what is suspension and what is penalty, no? In some instances, as soon as the case is filed against you, they already freeze your accounts, which I think is very unfair. Because freezing of accounts does not only affect the individual, it affects the family, it affects the children, it affects your other businesses and business partners. Freezing is a penalty. It is not a, parang natalo ka na sa kaso. What has happened here in most instances, if finailang ka ng kaso, regardless of the presumption of innocence, soon as the case is filed against by the ombudsman, the DOJ, the ombudsman in the Sandigan Bayan, already, immediately, it would seem that you now have the burden of proof that you are innocent. Whereas in law, there must be the burden of proving that you are guilty.
Why is
should
it
be
like
against those who accuse.
Why is it like that? Is it because that is the interpretation of the ombudsman, or is it really in law that it's stated like that?
I think it's just I think it is abuse of authority. In instances that I have seen, I think it is abuse of authority.
Ma'am, once you're elected as a senator, ano po yung priority measures na gusto nyong i-legislate? Considering with your rich experience po sa private sector as a lawyer, ano po yung tingin nyo na kailangan i-prioritize ng mga lawmakers dito sa bansa?
Well, first, to the practical question, no? A practical answer to your question is, I think every legislator elected must make an inventory of all the laws. Because tama yung sinasabi ng iba na ang dami naman nating batas, enforcement lang yan. So, you don't need more laws to improve the countries. What we need is implementation of the law. So, what's important is, number one, what I would do in my first 100 days, I would make an inventory of all the laws. Okay. Second, I would make an inventory of implementing regulations because legislation is not self-executory. In most laws, nakalagay sa dulo. For instance, if it concerns fiscal measures, it says there, the rules and regulations shall be drafted by the Department of Finance within 30 days from the time that the law has been published, no? So, tanungin natin, saan yung rules and regulations? Kagaya ng recently, landmark legislation, yung anti-competition, yung what is this recent law of the president in business?
Antitrust?
Yes, antitrust legislation,
Yes.
where businesses are where businesses are owned and controlled by...
Parang nagiging monopoly sila.
Yes, monopoly. So, you don't need another legislation on antitrust because people are saying, bakit sa bayan natin? Although in the recent APEC, sabi ng presidente, 99% of our economy is controlled by micro, small, medium enterprises. 99%, which contribute thus to 64-point-something% of our national economy. So you ask yourself, what is this 99% when it is also said that the economy is controlled by 36 families?
That's right.
Who control most of the major industries? Nasa electricity, transportation, communication. So you have to look at this and define what really is control, what really is monopoly, what really is antitrust. Wala yan sa legislation, nasa regulation yan. So I would also make an inventory of rules and regulations implementing legislation because sometimes laws are not implemented because walang implementing regulation. We must resist as legislators. We must resist the desire to make laws, to make more laws when there are existing laws already. And thirdly, I must also, in my first 100 days, find out kung may budget yan. Kung minsan may law, may implementing rules, wala naman sa budget appropriation. Kagaya ng education. Our Constitution says that education must have the biggest appropriation in the budget. It's not happening that way. For the longest time, the biggest item in the budget is servicing of our foreign debt. So, dapat tignan natin yan. Instead of creating more and more laws.
Talking about the implementing rules and regulations, a lot of times, the intent of the lawmakers is somehow superseded by the, how the implementing rules and regulations are worded or are implemented, no? As an example that I can think of is the Comprehensive Firearms Law, which was supposed to make it easier or for people to own their firearms. But what really has happened is because of the difficulty in securing all of the requirements, no? I think a lot of people have not been able to renew their licenses, or there are now more requirements that you now have to have the license to own and possess on top of the registration. So how would you prevent the abuse of the IRR, or the implementing rules and regulations, that effectively supersede the law into whoever is the one in the department preparing those things?
I think part of the process in coming out with regulation is public hearings and public consultation. For instance, now that you mention it, in fact, it's in the media today. I was approached by a certain Arnel Lim, who is president of the Tricycles, yung mga National Tricycles Association. And they count about 2 to 3 million nationwide. Ang sabi nila, napaka-oppressive naman itong bagong administrative regulation, which requires them not only to get a police clearance.
The driver's license. You're talking about the driver's license.
Yeah, these are tricycle drivers. Not only should they get a police clearance, kailangan daw
NBI.
ng NBI clearance.
Yes.
Para malaman yung sino ba yung convicted of crimes against moral turpitude. So sabi ng presidente, si Sir Arnel, sabi niya, napakahirap po noon, attorney. Because number one, siguro sapat na yung police clearance, because yun lang ang nakalagay sa batas. Except that the LTO, by regulation, expanded the law to include NBI clearance.
I heard about that, no? Because effectively, if you're on the hit list of the NBI, and even assuming that maybe some of the people actually got into trouble, does that mean that they are no longer entitled to have a livelihood because they can no longer, let's say the tricycle drivers who have had maybe a history of being convicted for a petty crime or something like that. So does that mean that they're no longer entitled to a livelihood?
Precisely, by regulation, they have exceeded legislation. So it is abuse of power. Kanya-kanina, alam ko, nagkagulo because sabi ng presidente, ngayon yung mga tricycle, you know what it means to a tricycle driver? Kagaya kung nasa Tawi-Tawi ka, meron ka bang may NBI dyan? May NBI ba dyan sa Tawi-Tawi? If you're not in any of the major cities, if you are a tricycle driver, gagastos ka, pamasahe ka, para pumunta 3 provinces away sa isang NBI or sa isang city na may NBI. Ilang araw na trabaho yan. Gagastos ka pa ng transportation. When that is served as well by a police clearance.
Ma'am, we have to stop for now. Makakasama po rin po natin si Atty Lorna Kapunan sa ating pagbabalik. Thank you.